Collect your things, Dottie. You're done at noon. It was March 1959, and the floor of the Harlan Garment Company smelled of machine oil and sizing starch, and the particular warmth of 60 electric sewing machines running since 6 in the morning. The kind of floor where a woman could set her stitch count and keep it for 8 hours without being asked, where the machines ran in rows under fluorescent lights, and the radio on the supervisor's desk played the same 3 stations all day, and nobody complained, because nobody was there for the radio. Clyde Mabry, the new production manager, had come down from the office with a clipboard and a list that the parent company out of Cincinnati had sent 2 weeks prior. He had called the list an efficiency review. He had worked through it in a single morning. Dorothea Stepp stood at her machine with her hands at her sides and her work apron still tied. She did not argue. She had learned something about the cost of arguing. The women at the adjacent machines had not stopped working, but the rhythm had changed. The sound of the floor had gone careful, the way a room goes careful when someone is watching from a place nobody can quite locate. At the far end of the cutting table, a large man in a canvas jacket and a battered hat had been waiting 20 minutes for the floor manager to finish a call, and he was watching Mabry's back. Here is the story. Dorothea Stepp had worked that floor for 11 years. She had started in February of 1948, the winter after her husband, Roy, came home from the Korean Peninsula, not from the war, which had not yet started, but from occupation duty with the 7th Infantry, which was its own kind of gone. Roy had come back thinner and quieter than he had left, and he had gotten work at the mine on the north side of Harlan, and for 4 years things had been the way things can be when 2 people who love each other are willing to work hard and ask for very little. Roy died in the spring of 1952. A roof collapse at the No. 3 heading. He was 30. Dorothy was 28. They had 2 daughters, Patsy, who was 6, and Louise, who was 4. She had been at the garment factory 3 weeks when Roy died. She had taken the job because the grocery account had needed supplementing, and because she was the kind of woman who found it easier to be in motion than to stay still. After Roy, the job became the thing that kept the 4 walls of that house from becoming a place she could not get out of in the mornings. She had her machine, the Singer 281 on the 3rd row from the wall, and she had her stitch count, which was 94 to the minute on a flat seam and never below 88 on a welt. And she had 11 years of knowing exactly what she was capable of and doing it every day without being asked to account for herself. She had not missed a shift. The supervisor before Mabry, a man named Harrell, had told her twice that her output numbers were the standard he set the rest of the floor by. She had kept the card he had written that in the drawer beside her bed. Clyde Mabry had been at the Harlan plant for 6 weeks. He had come down from Cincinnati with the efficiency list and the new per-unit targets, and a way of moving through a room that made it clear he had done this before in other plants and expected to be done with it quickly. He was not unkind to people, and the list simply had names on it, women who were at the top of the wage scale, because they had been there long enough to earn it, and the arithmetic of the new targets required reducing the senior labor cost by 18%. Dorothea Stepp was 4th on the list. She was also 41st on the wage scale, meaning she had 39 women below her in seniority, and Mabry had He had gotten through 3 names before Dorothy. He had done it the same way each time. Quiet, specific, no argument offered, and none invited. He had the completed efficiency forms on the clipboard for documentation. Dorothy was at her machine when he came to her row. She had seen him come through the door. She had watched him stop at the first machine in row 2, and she had watched Martha Giles take her hands off the fabric and fold them in her lap and go still. She had watched him do it again at the 2nd row and the 3rd. She had turned back to her own machine and run another 6 inches of seam on the piece in front of her, and finished it properly before she put her hands in her lap and waited. Mowbray told her the decision had come from Cincinnati. He said her work was not in question. He said the forms were complete and she should speak to the office window on her way out. Dorothy sat at the machine with her hands in her lap. The women on either side of her had not looked up. The woman 2 seats down, a younger woman named Carol Ann Pruitt, who had been there 14 months, had stopped her machine and was looking at the piece in front of her without seeing it. The radio on the supervisor's desk was playing something. Mowbray waited with his clipboard. If you've ever watched someone who deserved better be told to go and felt the words die before they got out, drop your state in the comments. This story belongs to all of them. He had been at the far end of the cutting table the whole time. The floor manager's call had ended 3 minutes into Mowbray's second row. But the man in the canvas jacket had not moved to flag him down. He had his hat in one hand, and he had been watching the floor in the way a man watches something he is trying to understand the dimensions of. He had watched Mowbray work through 4 women in the time it takes to drink a cup. He had watched the floor go careful around each one. He had watched Dorothy turn back to her machine and finish her seam before she folded her hands. He watched her sit there with the apron still tied. That was the thing. The apron still on. The piece of fabric still in the machine, finished, squared, the thread trimmed. 11 years of doing the work right, and she had not stopped doing it right, even in the last 6 inches before she was told to stop. He set his hat on the cutting table. He walked the length of the floor the way a man walks when he is not in a hurry and is not interested in announcing anything. He came to where Mowbray was standing, and he looked at the clipboard. And then he looked at Mowbray. "What's the daily rate for a senior seamstress?" Mowbray looked at him. Something crossed his face, not recognition, not yet, just the calculation of a man deciding whether this was his problem. "That's not the daily rate." Mowbray looked down at the clipboard. "480. She's been here 11 years. That's correct." The man looked at him for a moment without expression. "Then she's not done at noon." He looked at Dorothy. "She'll keep her machine. Her wage goes to $5.10 as of this week. You'll put it through as a senior grade adjustment." He looked back at Mowbray. "Cincinnati will approve it." Mowbray opened his mouth. "They'll approve it." Mowbray closed the clipboard. Something in the room had shifted, and he understood that the shift. He looked at the man in the canvas jacket the way you look at something when you are deciding whether to find out what it is or simply to proceed. He proceeded. He made a note, and he walked back toward the office stairs without looking back at the floor. The floor did not go back to normal right away. It went to the particular careful that comes after something has resolved but hasn't been fully. Dorothy was still at her machine. She was looking at the fabric piece in front of her. She did not look up for a long time. When she did, the man in the canvas jacket was still there. He had picked his hat back up. "I need a cost on 2 dozen work shirts, women's cut, the kind that hold up." His voice was level. "Below the machines. I'm outfitting a location crew in June, and the wardrobe department charges like they're dressing a governor. You know anyone who can run that order?" Dorothy looked at him. She looked at him for a moment the way a person looks at something they are still working out. "I can price that," she said. "I'll come back Thursday." He put his hat on. He walked back to the far end of the cutting table and said something to the floor manager that lasted no more than 10 seconds. And then he was gone through the main door, and the spring light was in through the gap for a moment, and then the door closed. One of the women on row 2 said the name. Just the name. Quiet. Like a woman saying something she wants to make sure she heard right. Dorothy untied her apron and tied it again and put her hands on the machine. She worked at the Harlan Garment Company for 9 more years. The senior grade adjustment went through on the following Thursday, effective the prior week, signed off without comment from the Cincinnati office. The production manager who replaced Mowbray left in June for a plant in Chattanooga was a man named D. Faulkner from Barberville, and he had grown up around factories and did not use clipboards the same way. Dorothy ran her machine until 1968, when her hands told her it was time. She had been sewing for 20 years by then, and her stitch count at the end was the same as it had been in the middle. 984 to the minute on a flat seam. She gave her Singer 281 to Carol, who had moved up to senior grade herself by 1963 and was still on the floor when Dorothy left. Patsy, the older daughter, took a teaching certificate from Eastern Kentucky University in 1964. She taught 4th grade in Harlan County for 26 years. She retired in 1990, and her former students sent so many cards that the pile of them would not fit on her kitchen table. Louise, the younger one, married a man named Dale Caudill in 1969. She moved to Lexington. They had 3 children. In 1974, when a woman on their street, a widow, recently arrived from eastern Ohio, 2 boys under 7 fell behind on the electric and the water in the same month. Louise Caudill went to the utility office on her lunch break and paid both accounts in full and did not mention it to the woman for 2 weeks, and then mentioned it only because the woman had already found out some other way and come to the door to ask. Louise told her it was nothing. The woman stood on the porch and did not know what to do with that. Louise told her to come in for coffee. She never explained to anyone where that instinct came from. But it had come from somewhere. Dorothea Stepp died in 1991 at 67. She was buried beside Roy in the county cemetery on the ridge above town, in the section that looks out over the valley and on clear days. The tree line on the far ridge past it. In the drawer of the nightstand beside her bed, among the cards from Patsy's students and an envelope of photographs, there was a single index card in a man's handwriting that had come with a Thursday check for 24 women's work shirts. The order had been placed, billed, and paid. The handwriting on the card read, "Good work on the seam allowances." That was all it said. She had kept it for 32 years. The card is still in the family. Louise has it. John Wayne never told anyone. Not the location scout he had been waiting to meet that morning, who never knew what had happened on the floor before their conversation. Not the wardrobe department, who received the shirts in June and filed the invoice and moved on. Not in any interview in the years that followed, and not in any letter that anyone ever found. He had a garment worker's daily wage reduced to a number in the time it takes a man to pour a cup of coffee, and he had said 3 sentences and walked back out the door. He noticed the ones that rooms had decided not to see. Not the loudest person in a room, the one sitting still with the work still in the machine, doing it right until the last possible second. Because that was the only thing she knew how to do, and she was not going to stop doing it simply because a man with a clipboard had told her to. The measure of a life is not what a person is given. It is what they keep doing after it has been taken. If this story stayed with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe if you haven't. There are more stories like this one, and every one of them deserves to be told. And unfortunately, they don't make men like John Wayne anymore.